really, really dumb question, but are we staying away from adults in general, or are we only focusing on kids? I mean, like, let's just say, you still said a Muslim population. I don't really know what the traditions are and what the culture's like. Do women have any say of their finances? Is it something that, or is that something that is solely the man's job in that culture? I don't know.
And we, the groups that we ran into, there were girls and boys that were involved in it at that age. You're asking me questions I probably don't know, you know, to be honest. And our particular program was focused, the scoping of it was focused on children, but the league in itself can focus wherever we want. I mean, our focus area is the achievement gap, so if we can find ways to help alleviate the achievement gap, it might be through, to the point of one of our projects, parents.
Homes. Yeah, homes is all about developing curriculum for the parents. So that's all about the parents versus, I mean, it's their kids are going to the science fairs and everything, but really our whole sole purpose is to develop a curriculum for the parents to help their kids, because that's really where the achievement gap is going to be solved, is if we help the parents at home after school. Because they're getting a good education, decent education, but it's when they leave school that they're getting the support they need. So that is a huge focus. So it's not just about the kids.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I think the questions you're asking are the good kind of questions that we as a project development team need to ask as we're shaping these things out. I mean, who do we really want to talk to? How do we do it? What is the culture? How do we build it in?
I know we're running short on time.
One more question.
One last question.
Does anyone have one from the crowd?
Just, can you give a couple examples of what happens or and in what ways a project spins off? I mean, I can totally make a couple in my head, but maybe some real life examples of how
kids, and that's a really good example. Yeah. I don't think did we talk about that? I don't think we talked
How
about
it's
that.
spun off?
How it's spun off, yeah.
And I also did want to mention very briefly Gilda's Club, just because that's one project where it didn't end up progressing the way we wanted it to. So I'll just give a really quick synopsis of that, and then we can talk about books for kids. So Gilda's Club, for those of you, we're all of a generation that probably doesn't know Gilda Radner as much. Saturday Night, yeah, see, that's what I thought. Michelle's like, what?
I know.
It's my birthday. So, long story short, Gilda Radner was a character on, or not a character, she was an actress on Saturday Night Live. And so if you see any of like the 70s, 80s Saturday Night Live, she had big curly hair or whatever. Anyway.
She was married to Gene Wilder.
She was married to Gene Wilder. Anyway, she unfortunately passed away of cancer several years ago. And so her friends and family started an organization called Gilda's Club. And it's an organization that it supports cancer, people living with cancer, but even more so the friends and family of the person that is living with cancer or has just recently passed away from cancer. So it's really meant to be an organization that provides services, counseling, support groups, etc. Long story short, project development, similar to you, was cooking up a few different project ideas. They were not totally fleshed out, and at least to the rate that they wanted them to be. And Gilda's Club came knocking on their door because they wanted to open a chapter here in the Twin Cities. And so the board at that time, along with the membership, decided to create a partnership with Gilda's Club, where we would work with the children that came to Gilda's Club for services. So that's the quick background. I was the chair of it the very first year it was up and running. The whole gist of this story is that Gilda's Club, this was probably back in 07-ish, Gilda's Club was not up and running yet here in the Twin Cities. So we entered this partnership with an organization that had all the best intentions of opening their doors within 1 to 2 years of when we signed our agreement. They just were not there yet. And so what ended up happening, they knew very well that we could not fundraise for them to help them open their doors. But unfortunately, that's what they really needed help with. And to be totally honest, they saw that we had a membership of hundreds of women that really care about this issue, and we could help financially support them too, in their minds. So what ended up happening is, as a committee in that very first year, we really struggled with what we could actually do to help support them, other than asking for money to help them with a capital campaign. So that is one instance where very quickly we realized that we maybe didn't have the right understanding of where their organization was, and we had to sunset out of that within a year. And I was the chair, and Heather was on the board when that happened, and not a fun thing, and it's a hard thing to communicate to league members, but it was the right thing to do. So when I say don't transition too soon, transition when it makes sense to transition. Because you don't want to do something that's not beneficial for the league or for that community organization. The good news is, from what I understand, Gilda's Club is planning to open their doors soon, and there may be opportunity for league members to get involved in that in the near future. So,
But it is also a good example, I personally feel, of where project development maybe wasn't as involved as they could have been in that process.
Yes.
And they didn't bring their insight as to how best to structure it, and so we kind of got in over our head with the best intentions.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
it ended up not working out as well as if it had had a well thought out project development.
Yeah. Books for Kids, again, you guys jump in. Books for Kids ended up transitioning 2 or 3 years ago, to an organization called Read and Deed. And I kind of laugh when I say organization because it's a really sweet story. It's a girl who at the time, I don't know, she was like 10 or 11. Okay, 9, thank you. She had this goal, she was this little girl, she had this goal of collecting 1 million books by the time she was 18. Yeah. And she was wildly successful. I mean, who does, you put a picture of a little girl.
I know, it's a little frustrating because I'm keeping 9-year-olds so much better than 20 women.
She, I think she's had sites at, some of her collection sites have been at M&I Bank, and so if you, I think Kara Levin ran some of the M&I Bank commercials where she was on it. So anyway, that's who we ended up transitioning it to. She has great ambitions, and she was already like halfway to her goal by the time we actually transitioned our project to her. So it seemed like a really great fit. Again, my biased opinion. I think some of the things we didn't look at when we made that decision to transition, on the surface, their mission is very similar to what our mission was for Books for Kids. She was collecting books and she was giving them away. I think in hindsight, I was actually the VP on the board the very first year of the transition, so I kind of inherited this transition. What we would have liked to have seen done with the books was not happening. So some of our old recipient organizations were no longer able to get books because, for example, she didn't have a warehouse space. It was literally her family collecting these books in her garage.
She didn't have structure to support it.
Yes, right. So she didn't have the collection process and the sorting process and the distribution process that we had. And so we thought, oh, we can help her with that. But you have to be clear on what your expectations are as you're transitioning something. So she, on the surface they were, yes, we want your support and we want to learn from what you guys did. But I think it was a lot more work than what they were ready for too. They weren't necessarily ready to put all that effort into it. And so we just had to kind of let things go and be okay with that. And everything turned out okay, but we also had to realize that our recipient organizations in Minneapolis could no longer get the books because their system was people had to come to their garage to pick up books. So it's things like that where I think as you're transitioning, just be really clear about what we as a league want to see live on in that project. We're no longer in charge of it, so we have to be willing to let go of some things, but I think we need to have really clear expectations of what we expect and how we can help support that before we let it go. And in some instances we just want to wash our hands of it, and that's okay. But what is really important to the league to keep as a tradition or as a legacy or whatever it may be.
So did we reach out to them, or did they come to us? Like, how does
I think we reached out to them for that one, and that's probably how it usually.
I said I wasn't involved, so
I think that's how it usually happens. We usually have to scour and look for the partners, but there may be instances where they come to us. Go ahead.
I was going to say, in Between the Lines, Parenting with Purpose asked me at my very first meeting when they said, we already do this program, let's make this a reward, make them earn it, then we'll talk about it, don't pay attention to class, the whole thing is sort of, give, and it'll all be great. And she ended the meeting with, you're not going to drop this, and if you are, can I have it? And so that's another example of a partner that went, I'm glad you're figuring it out. You figure out the kinks, you figure out the system, you get it going, but if you ever want to get rid of it, they've already expressed that they want it, which is huge, obviously.
I was going to say, to the earlier sort of higher level question, projects roll off in a lot of different ways. Sometimes they're sunset, like Smart Sense. Sometimes they become a freestanding NGO, like the Crisis Nursery or Free Arts, because we've just built so much momentum that they're ready to sort of fly on their own. And sometimes we partner with organizations and they take on our curriculum and our program and vet it into what they're doing. You know, a good example of that would be something like, you know, Books for Kids in a sense was something like that, but also we used to do a program called, it was with DIY Indian Works, the Seeds program, which is years and years ago. It was ending when Karen and I first started, but it was a program that worked with mothers, young mothers, and sort of at-risk teens that were dealing with pregnancy, you know, at 15, 16, 17. And that was a program that we then rolled into the recipient org that was working with it, and they put it into their programming. So there's a lot of different successful ways that it happens.
I think when I was talking to Megan Rui about this last year and Christina, and we were brainstorming, I think one of the things that I mentioned and we talked a lot about was just making sure that you're partnering with organizations that are the experts in this. We are not, I mean, as much as we try to be, we are not the experts in the achievement gap, and that's okay. But the fact that you guys are partnering with Achieve Minneapolis on these 2 new projects is huge, because they are the experts and they're doing this every day. And so we can be the thinking power behind how to create a project and be the man-woman power behind it. But then also don't be afraid up front to say, okay, can this type of project live on beyond us within Achieve Minneapolis or one of their other partner organizations? Obviously you don't want that to be the very first discussion, but I think it's okay to be thinking about that now. If this is something that Achieve Minneapolis could envision living on even beyond Junior League's involvement.
There's 2 things in my league career that I've learned from project development, and I think one of them I just was spoken a lot when I started the league, just part of the conversation, and you're like, how do we come up with these brilliant ideas, because we're so awesome. I heard many people say that a lot of nonprofits, a lot of places that need help don't have the staff. So they would look to the league for, you know, figure out the kinks, and, you know, we'd love to take it on if it works, like Smart Sense. I mean, pretty soon everybody was doing it, it just wasn't needed anymore. Books for Kids, somebody had interest. Kids in the Kitchen, I don't think we know. Where that's going to go. And then the other thing
But it may not go anywhere. But just continue on.
Oh, right, you might keep it forever. Sure. We could do that. And the other thing that when I was given between the lines in the concept, I'm like, what happens if this fails? Which I think is every chair's question when they're like, oh, now I have to go to the community management board meeting and talk about this. So, you know, what if we can't get into any prisons? And they honestly, multiple project development members said, you can't fail in the league. You try. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Noted. Hopefully everybody learned something. But the key is you can't fail in the league. Try, put your effort out. Needs change. Maybe the league is no longer interested. Just a million reasons. But those are the 2 things I heard a lot spoken around project development. And I haven't actually heard that you can't fail in a couple of years. So I tell people that all the time. You can't fail. Just do your best.
Cool. Well, thank you guys so much. That was very helpful. Was that helpful for all you guys?
Thank you.
Yeah. You can talk for hours. Yeah, you can talk for hours.
I've had these flashbacks of when, I'm not a sustainer yet, but when sustainers came to talk today, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm one of those.
I didn't know I had answers.
No, that's great. Oh my God.
So thanks, guys.